Welcome to From Nothing, the podcast where we go deep with healthcare founders on how they actually got started in this crazy industry. I'm Ian Sefferman, alongside my colleague Patrick Haig, and today we're joined by Lisa McLaughlin, co-founder and co-CEO of Workit Health. Workit Health is on a mission to change the way addiction is treated in America. We talk with Lisa about how their business got started with the perfect founder problem fit, being ostracized by their initial community as they shifted to harm reduction services, and what it's like to have two co-CEOs in a startup. Take a listen. Okay, Lisa, hello. Thank you for joining us. So let's just start really quickly. Can you give us the 60-second version of what is Workit Health and how did you guys get started in it?
Yeah, Workit Health is the industry leader of digital addiction care. We provide intensive outpatient treatment from mobile apps for individuals for all kinds of addiction. And we got started really as two patients in long-term recovery who were really dissatisfied with the cracks in the system that our friends were falling through and dying, and wanted to build a system that was more human-centered and empowered and would get people where they want to go, as opposed to putting them in or out of a wagon. Very strictly defined definition of what being in recovery meant.
Wow. Okay. So clearly very meaningful work. It sounds like, I think I know this, I think people probably know this, but addiction, primarily the opioid crisis, or like all across the board? What does that split look like for you today?
Yeah, no, all across the board. So this is a question that comes up a lot. I think there's a lot of interesting healthcare companies coming into the market that are just looking at one substance, like I'm an alcohol intervention, I'm an opioid intervention. But really at the end of the day, most use is polysubstance use. So we took like a comprehensive programmatic approach to the space where people can come in with 14 different addictions and we'll help them get down to one and then down to zero over time, and have programs for all of the underlying process addictions in addition to the substance use. So that's things like gambling, sex and love addiction, eating disorders, sort of process-based addictions that we treat as well, in addition to like a core opioid use disorder system, problem that someone's going through, or alcohol use disorder.
Okay, fascinating. And what about your background? Like, how did you get into this?
Yeah, I mean, this is oddly a very perfect outcome for my very weird dual degree at University of Michigan in information science and social work. So I was initially drawn to the addiction field after undergrad. So I got sober, and so of course I wanted to study my brain health, and ended up in the psychiatry department at Michigan in an addiction research center, looking at like a longitudinal study of 300 alcoholic families over a 30-year period. So I was on the research side, and the director there, I think, once said to me that he estimated that the research to practice divide in addiction was like 20 years long. And so that inspired a lot of my explorations into what I wanted to do in graduate school. But I was a young rock climber, so instead I decided to go be an experiential wilderness therapist for a bit, which really concretized my desire to get a social work degree. So I started in that, and then from there realized that the compassion fatigue that comes with being a counselor just really wiped me out. And I felt more comfortable working on the system side of social work, which landed me in the information science department, where they were doing a lot of like social impact technology work and looking more at designing systems for better social justice, better access to care, things like that. So it all came around to a 7 or so year career in the Bay Area, working mostly on med tech interventions, and then starting Workit with Robin.
Okay, so you did undergrad at Michigan. You went out. You became a therapist. You realized that the fatigue that comes along with that is just super harsh. You went back. You got your master's. Is that?
Yeah, I got a master's in social work.
Okay.
And then I actually responded to Katrina as part of that program and went down and did a bunch of community needs work. And as part of that, had this kind of spiritual moment where I realized that everything that we were doing from a social work perspective to respond to these families that had these devastated homes was completely ridiculous. So we'd have like a survey, we'd be going door to door, asking people to estimate the damage of their home, and they would have no home. And the form would say, put in how many windows are broken, and just the forms, the whole system of inputs in the social work system was so very broken. And I became really obsessed with that issue. And so that drew me into UX and metadata and understanding information collection in social services and how much of a problem it is and how much innovation is needed there, which really led me to work on a project called Open Michigan, which was University of Michigan's effort to put the medical school curriculum online as a free open education resource for like hospitals in Africa or all around the globe, where there were limited access to updated CEUs and training materials for physicians in low resourced care settings. And so worked on that, which led me to a job in the Bay Area at a similar kind of ed tech open educational resource platform, at which time I met my co-founder in AA, because we stayed sober the whole time, and met in Oakland AA. And she was a designer getting her second design degree at California College of the Arts. And we started working together on a couple of the ed tech platforms that I was working on at the time and loved it. We were also friends in AA. I was her sponsor, which is really scandalous. You're not really supposed to start a business with your sponsor. And I did that. So that happened. But, you know, through it all, we really came to this place where we had this question that we were stewing on for a couple of years before we started the company, which was like, why are we still meeting in this Oakland basement, drinking like really bad coffee, while, you know, Omada Health is coming out with a diabetes prevention program that sits in your pocket and can be used all the time. And we really see, and science sees, addiction as more of a brain health condition and chronic condition like diabetes that should be treated that way. But all the metaphors and the ways that we were participating in the recovery world were all based on these like moments of life change where you had rock bottom and then began, as if there was like this very linear way that you lived life, as opposed to really what we have, which is a much more normal way of looking at it, which is just like we really should look at it like a heartbeat monitor. Like you're in recovery for the long haul. You have like ups and downs. There's not always going to be an up and to the right steady state of recovery. I know Americans love those hockey sticks, but it's just not how it works. And we need a system that reflects that people can fit within and normalize that process. So that was all going on. And then in 2014, I was working on another ed tech platform. And again, it was like we were making stuff for Africa, but it was mostly people from Stanford that were benefiting. It was very, I don't know, it just didn't feel like vital work. It was very important to, you know, education's important. I have 3 kids. I really care about education, but it just didn't feel like I was working purpose-wise on the most important thing in my life. And between the time when I moved to the Bay Area and started the company, over 40 people I knew from Metro Detroit died from various intersections with addiction, suicide, opioid use. And then right before we started the company, my roommate from graduate school, who I lived with during that social work program, who was newly sober but a year or so ahead of me in the process, she died. And she had a 5-year-old son, and she had been super sober like 7 years before the relapse. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And Robin was having similar sort of life changes that sort of happened to line up. She at the time was wrapping up a startup that she sold to a yoga journal that she was doing with her fiance, which was wonderful, but they both hated yoga. So they tried to like bring me into that. And I was like, I'm a yoga teacher. I only taught 1 yoga class. I too don't love yoga. None of us love yoga, but this is a really cool interface. And maybe we could do our addiction thing with it. And that's literally how Workit was born. It's a very strange, circuitous tale, but Robin had similar like heartbreaking family history, lost, 2 grandparents and an aunt and uncle in one incident based on addiction in her family. So we just had seen a lot of loss, and we're like, enough's enough. We need to design a better system. and decided to start Workit. And so we bootstrapped it, to your question, from 2015 to really 2017, to be honest. Like we were first time founders, so had no idea what we were doing. She was actually a second time founder. I take that back. So she was a second time founder with Yoga Buddy, and I was a first time founder. But we had never built a healthcare company together. And so this was a new space for her, whereas she had a very successful organization, Siren Design, where she had worked with all these rock health companies, built the front ends of their apps, done incredible branding work for them. So had a lot of experience in digital health, but not necessarily on the deeply medical side. And so we really, in the beginning, both having like enough IDEO training to be dangerous. She had worked for IDEO on a bunch of projects, just started throwing Post-its at the wall and are like, why are we alive? Why are our friends dead? What's the gap? And some very clear things like came out, and it was all about just like getting people to evidence-based care, and people mostly not getting there. And so then we started, toying around with that, made our first MVP, which was very much a very simple thing that got copied by like 800 people. It's so funny when you find your MVP like 3 years later on some weird like dribble site or something, and you're like, oh, that didn't work. But it was simple to just get help out. And we thought we would deliver this app to people in between meetings when they were triggered and weren't like connected to the community, but we're already in the recovery community, and nobody liked it at all. It bombed. And except for a few people in rural Canada who were super severely using at the time, but felt that this was like a road for them, and like tracked it down and used our very, very spare web app. And that's where Workit was born. And then we iterated from there into the product that we have today, which is more of a full scale, like digital addiction clinic that treats the full spectrum of everything from prevention to detox, through online services.
Really, really cool. So I wanna drill into those first couple of years where you were bootstrapping. So you founded the company, it sounded like 2015, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. You had been like pseudo working with Robin now for like at least a year at that point. It sounded like 2014 or so.
Oh, no, 2011. Not on Workit, but like we had worked together at these other startups. So we had a long history of working together. We were talking about Workit, I want to say maybe since, if I really look back at like the idea of doing something in addiction, since maybe 2012, 2013.
Okay.
But it was just like a little tinkering idea and something we talked about at coffee dates after meetings and stuff. No, we didn't really take it seriously until the end of 2014 when Aja died, who's my friend that I lived with. And then started really the first month of 2015 trying to look into resources, Y Combinator, how to start a startup, looking into just the general, how do you make a entity name, how do you incorporate in Delaware, all of those fun things. And yeah, we've been really iterating ever since. And now we have 150 people. So it's a much larger company. We're really almost bordering on the are we a startup anymore sort of identity crisis, but not quite. I think we're still a startup, but yeah, so it's come a long way since then.
And so 2015, you're like, how to start a startup, you're trying to figure out how to incorporate. You launched this MVP, which it sounds like it was just a web app. Is that right? Mm-hmm. What did the product actually do? It sounded like try to get them into evidence-based therapy, but what did that look like? And how did you find those early customers?
Well, in the beginning, evidence-based therapy was just all we knew was that people really benefited from support from peers. They benefited from cognitive behavioral therapy, and people benefited from long-term recovery relationships or recovery-oriented systems of care. So all this is the social connection piece. It was just like you could reach out and ask to get help, or you could help out someone who was in the app, and it was very simple. And the idea was that we would send exercises, cognitive behavioral therapy exercises to people to work on in between meetings. They could also connect with others in the app. And so it was just content an interaction. Content and chat, basically, was the whole program.
Okay.
That is not sufficient for someone who's still like really using intensive opioids. And so from there, it became a full suite of full-on telemedicine services and social work and integrative care wraparounds and stuff like that.
Yep. And when it was just that initial piece, then how did you find those first customers, first users? Did you charge them? Was it free or?
No, it's totally free. We emailed our friends in AA and we were like, will you try this? And like our mom and dad, and and they tried it. And it was interesting because we learned some early things there that like people that are essentially Al-Anon people really liked it. They really liked getting the emails that were notifications. They were really involved, but that fits, right? Like they really want to see their family members change and they're really motivated. So we've taken that learning over time to build things like family support apps that are free, that enable people that are in our program to be supported by their family member along the way. But it definitely wasn't our intention to build into that archetype. And we were much more interested in the people who stumbled into that initial email list of people. This is even like app is a strong word for what this was. This was this is not an app in any way that I would think of it today. But the people that got added to the list by people that were on the list were sort of how we developed our insights into what was helpful or what was needed. And that led us much more clearly into forms of treatment for people that are completely cut off from care, or they might be someone who's queer in a very conservative community in rural Ontario, or just somewhere where they have no real access to the way that people do this normally, which is normally in this like face-to-face confessional way. And so those people were what we built towards. And a lot of them initially were like men that were super worried about the stigma and like weren't gonna do the like, I need help, that were like either stuffing their feelings or just not getting the help that they need out of like a desire to be, to kind of suck it up and just experience it. But there are other types too. There are people that were just very busy, have children, like just needed some support any which way. And we really leaned into those types of archetypes and built our program around them.
So you started building this thing, like once you got past the sort of initial, here's who actually likes it, here's what we really need to go build. Did you guys continue to go consumer focused, consumer first? You're like, let's go find these folks, whether through AA programs or otherwise. Like, did you build partnerships? Did you end up selling to health plans? Like, where are you on that spectrum today, and how did that progression go?
Mm-hmm. We kept going direct to consumer, but a big change happened, which is that Robin and I were from the abstinence-based recovery community. So we got sober in AA. And the initial people that we reached out to were people who weren't necessarily big proponents of harm reduction or psychiatry as a main mode of treatment, but were bigger believers in having a spiritual experience and that being like the key driver of what gets you sober. Like you make a big mistake, you hurt a family member, you have a consequence, and you make this life change. We started to realize that there were so many more people that were never going to gel with that model that we had to look really hard at our product being something not for us, which I think is hard for founders to say. We aren't the archetype. This isn't our, this isn't our product. And I think that's painful for people, but for us, it was really great because we really looked into the science then, which is when we realized that things like medication-assisted treatment and harm reduction, which were super stigmatized in AA and like to the point of people being ostracized for, engaging in them or not being considered in real recovery, we began to understand that those had a lot of evidence behind them and were saving a lot of lives when it came to opioids. And we shifted into fully delivering virtual harm reduction services. And that was an odyssey for us in particular because we were basically completely ostracized from our 12-step communities that we'd been in for decades and considered to be kind of part of the problem or part of the drug pushing pharmaceutical companies that wanted to medicate everyone, things like that. When it just was so evident in the science that 80% of people in this population have overlapping mood disorders, they need care, they need to treat their comorbid depression and anxiety, and they need often medication to get through the early days of opioid withdrawal, alcohol withdrawal, whatever they're going through. And so that changed the platform a lot, and we became a much fuller stack clinical app in 2017. And then I would say that was a key kind of change in the culture and dynamic of the company towards HIPAA compliance, joint commission, learning about health plans, understanding that at the end of the day, we needed to have a product that people would private pay for so that we knew that it was good enough for people to really feel like they were receiving a valuable service. But at the end of the day, healthcare plans in America should be paying for addiction care, especially under mental health parity. And the best model for our patients and for our future was going to be to have the health plans cover the care. And so that's what led us into a much more B2B2C model from 2017 and beyond, which is where what we've scaled is that digital clinic, which is much more focused on, again, still finding our own members. So using the same things that we did in private pay to engage members, because health plans are notoriously very bad at finding their own members or having updated contact information. They're just so large and have such complex organizations with many, many different innovation units and different people moving in different directions. And so that's been our focus ever since. And we had to learn a lot about a lot of aspects of American healthcare that I'd rather not know, that I now know. But it got us to a model that we see as an equitable addiction care model that will be with us far into the future because it's delivering something that's not incentivizing really expensive episodes of care at a condo in Newport Beach with a horse for $200K, or at the same time incentivizing people to only go to the emergency room because they don't know what else to do, because they have nowhere else to go. It's very much like a different paradigm, a complete shift from those types of thinking. And it's taken a couple years. I think healthcare is slow. So we'll have investors that are like our marketing firms on the D2C side, and that's their bench. And they're like really confused by CMS and like revenue cycle management and reimbursement. And then we'll have our healthcare plan strategic partners that will bring a whole nother set of understandings to the table. And Workit has been very much like a dance between staying true to our direct to consumer, like patient-led ethos, and being a very medical healthcare company, which is where we landed. And that's always challenging. I think that's challenging for everyone. But when you look at the health and wellness space, there's nowhere where I would rather be in the market than in medical and in real care, because there's so much wellness, there's so much stuff out there. It's a abundance of riches in terms of everything from open educational resources to meditation to like the tools are out there, but the access is not. And that's sort of where I think the really interesting healthcare innovations are happening around the actual marriage of the medical care with delivery and digital, really convenient formats, which is where we ended up. And it's been really fun to grow in that way.
Cool. So you're like, we love where we're at today. We love being able to be sort of at the center of the medical space and selling into health plans, B2B2C. If you could do it all over again, would you scrap that initial stage of going only to consumer? Or you're like, no, actually the learnings of that was the important piece, and that's what allowed us to scale once we made the leap into health plans, and it would have been too hard otherwise.
Yeah, I don't really believe in any other path to market. I guess philosophically, I'm just a very agile product first person, and I really believe in that consumer experience. Robin really drilled that into me coming from a design agency and really having that lens towards what really produces engagement. And she had seen so many companies that she'd worked with on their brands or on their Series A deck or whatever die on the vine. Like when we came out, there were a lot of lessons learned in digital health already. A lot of people had raised a ton of capital and they had gotten big contracts with health plans or providers or whomever, but they had not been able to engage or find members. And so it was very clear to us that anything fundamentally B2B was going to struggle to survive in this era, especially as the market has gotten more consolidated and complex. And truly, I am still really grateful. That's the way that we built the organization, and that's the way that we built the product, because if you start B2B, you very, very quickly start building a product designed for our very convoluted system of care. And you very much lose touch with what patients need or what their pain points are or what their experience is. And you end up having a lot of strange boxes and metadata fields that serve an actuarial in a corner somewhere who's really actually not even reading the report that you sent them. And then you're not really changing anything. And you're reproducing in a digital version what we experience day to day when we go into healthcare centers, and there's lag and waiting lines or weird times we have to repeat the same thing 50 times. So I think that that's a good way to start for people that have ideas, is to start with the experience and the patient experience. It's at the core of what we do. It's something we've really been blessed to have to defend along the way. As we brought people in, more and more experts, we've had to do education about like patient-centered language, about changing old language, addict, clean and dirty drug tests. These are things that are not accurate or scientifically validated anymore, but they're out there and they're ubiquitous. And there's a ton of education that we have the opportunity to do, even within our own culture and company, around changing those mindsets and getting people to understand that whatever, a 46-year-old guy who decides voluntarily that he wants to try this does not need to be followed into a restroom and drug tested and, as if he was, under charges or threat of, I got in trouble as a teenager. That worked great for me. It was like, make a mess of yourself, get in trouble really fast, and it's all over. I wouldn't want my path to have been any other way. I'm grateful that I got sober before the internet. But, at the end of the day, what we've been doing just has not been empowerment focused at all. And it's been so punitive, and there's still so much to do to change that mindset and addiction.
Can you talk a little bit more about those early users and how you iterated with them, especially when it was such a sensitive topic, and especially as you kind of pulled them through your own journey as the product evolved and your care philosophy, you kind of grew, you used AA as like a distribution channel a little bit to get those early people, but then iterating through the product, you mentioned how you changed your care philosophy, your model of care, and you're like, now we're actually kind of going against the grain from where these people came from. Can you talk a little bit more about that evolution?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we started with a lot of experimenting with a lot of different types of content that we distributed. So we do audio shares. It'd be like Robin or me sharing as if we're at a meeting. And the idea was, let's democratize what happens within meetings, which is mutual support, and which is found to be useful. I mean, it's always about the quality of that support. So in the traditional mode, usually there's a wide range of different philosophies that people have. They might be really strict, like they might tie everything to the Bible, or they might be really progressive or have different views. There's a lot of different ways that self-help within AA breaks down across the country. But first we just made shares and we sent them to people. So it wasn't HIPAA or anything. It was like, this is just us sharing our experience, strength, and hope. We are not in a medical setting. This is not a medical interaction. I think when that changes is when we started to work with the National Science Foundation. We started to look at early funding mechanisms. When we decided to go medical, for really putting a program together that was deeply rigorous medically. And then we were in a situation where we were looking at creating an app where people were consented into research, so that those early interactions with our harm reduction patients were experimenting with, would people be interested even in receiving harm reduction services through a digital mechanism, and finding that out. And then very quickly, that allowed us to get all the expertise and information we needed to build a full stack, like what the requirements would be in order to operate legally like that. And then we just started to put together a clinic. And the reason why we went high severity is because at the end of the day, all sorts of people are going to land in your funnel, just like our first few users, right? You're going to have somebody that's like trying to do dry January, or somebody who is trying to get their girlfriend back because they had a blackout and pissed them off, but it's like a very fleeting thing, right? Like there isn't, like, they're not really in pre-contemplation. But we wanted to find the people that were really in pre-contemplation, that were like ready to try something. And so to find those people, we had to do a lot of creative things. So we tried all sorts of ways of finding those people. Like we put up a booth in Briarwood Mall in Ann Arbor to try to raise awareness about the app. We bought an Airstream in 2017, and that was going to be our dissemination mechanism. So we were like way ahead of the game. These are like all the rage now, and there's like all these mobile clinics, but we were like way ahead of the game, and everyone just thought we were crazy, right? No one would let us park this across the whole state of Michigan. So we were like, we're coming to see you, Monroe. We're bringing addiction treatment. You've got the #1 level of overdoses in the state. Enter Workit Health, and they were like, you can't park at Meyer. You can't park in Monroe. And we're like, great. And also, how do we get rid of the waste in the bathroom? And like, there were a lot of crazy iterations for getting the word out and finding people to engage them in this medical care. But it became very clear that we wanted a simple first interaction with a nurse practitioner or doctor to start the process. And that's what made us fully fledged to telemedicine. And that we wanted to provide access to medication-assisted treatment because there was such a lack of access. And 95% of treatment was abstinence-based, really, at that time. There was starting to be MAT treatment available, but it was very stigmatized. It was not considered real recovery. And so we experimented a lot in the early days with just trying different dissemination channels and starting with clinics. Like we'd have hybrid clinics where we'd see people once in person and then bring them into the app to help ground them in the experience, and because we were legally restricted to do so. And then from there, they had a social worker on the app, and all of those elements we'd start to build out through iteration. But it took a lot of different tests. And I think when we landed on medication-assisted treatment and we realized how many people were so cut off from care, like that's where we really started to get excited and be like, wow, we really have something that's really important and that's going to help a lot of people not die. And then instead of those services always being in like a really crappy neighborhood or behind bars because the person's considered to be drug seeking for using these medications, which is not even valid in psychiatry circles. We wanted it to be this like lovely brand experience and be empowering to attract people to dig in deeper, to do the psychosocial work with the social workers, but not with the like hammer kind of top down punitive approach. And yeah, it took a long time to iterate to the full stack digital and a lot of tests and fails. But I think what we learned was that medical care is very, very poorly distributed in this country. And, we really have an obligation first to find the people that are most at risk of dying and start there. And then, yeah, it's great to have a mocktail hour and support the people trying to do dry January at some self-insured employer, but like they're not on the top of our list. We made a pretty clear commitment from the beginning that we were not going to be a commercially focused business, that we had no intentions of only working with commercial health plans, that, the heart and soul of the recovery movement is that people are usually in their worst when they get sober and they don't have great healthcare insurance. They might bounce back onto it, but anybody who's trying to scale addiction treatment and is like, I'm working with fully self-insured employed people of, Google, it's like, you're not working on addiction in America. Like that's not where the problem is geographically, or I'm sure the problem's there. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. But like that's not a problem I'm interested in. Right? We were interested in Medicaid dissemination, making our program accessible to the crappiest low bandwidth smartphone so that you could sign up and see your doctor, as opposed to making this like really beautiful, like headspace animations type experience. We just want to like get the people to the care, and then everything else will follow. And I think we were right. I think that was the way to build.
Kind of in that vein of that philosophy, the mindset that you and Robin bring to that, I noticed you guys are a B Corp. When did you decide to do that or be that? Was that from the outset?
From the outset, really. So I had studied that in my master's program, had studied social enterprises, and had looked at all of the different triple bottom line models that were out there. My early ed tech work was sometimes in nonprofits in the Bay Area, and it was brutal trying to scale them using all these different philanthropic funding sources that had really different boards and different requirements. And I just did not think that you could scale any sort of social change systematically with that kind of backing. And I think Robin had a lot more familiarity and comfort with venture, and understood that we would have a lot of pressure on us to build something fast and to build towards something sustainable. And we both thought that was the right way to build and stood by it. And then we just wanted to lay the foundation in the company of having this really great support underneath all of that for like being a remote first culture. Like we were super ahead of the curve. Like we left the Bay Area and moved to Ann Arbor, which was like considered criminal, like at the time, like for like you're raising your seed round and everyone's like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, this is where the problem is. This is where there's a bunch of dead friends. Like I don't know anybody who's dead in San Francisco there are plenty of people I'm sure today, but like I went to 40 funerals here, and like we're gonna work here. And now it's like, oh, you guys are so cool. You're at the time it was like, you're nuts. Like this is not a good idea. And so I think we just had to really trust in building a B Corp, that like we were in it for the lost, and we started the company for a mission, which was to make sure that those holes went away that our friends slipped through. And so I think everything else built from there. And it was easy then to get in there and be like, okay, in the boardroom, yes, let's look at quarterly growth, but let's also look at retention. Let's also look at concordance. Let's look at how people are doing clinically and say, these are our measures that we're beholden to, in addition to the hypergrowth measures, so that we really can maintain the clinical integrity as we scale, and not just get into some crazy D2C, like buy all your members frenzy that I think is quite easy to get into, and that a lot of people fall into as a trap.
Did you get any kind of pushback from investors raising as a B Corp?
No, because at the end of the day, we were in our first phase of B Corp. And so we were still setting that first foundational assessment in place, which doesn't require the formal institutional changes. So by the time we went through the second phase of it, we were a larger organization with a robust board, and it had more resources to do that work. In the beginning, functionally, it made no difference because we had just done the work, made the commitments, built the policies, built them into our training for our non-existent employees. and then eventually we had employees that read the training, and now it's taken on a life of its own, and there's someone internally who works on it and evangelizes it and shepherds it through. But it was all very like idealistic and utopian from the beginning. It's just something that we wanted to do because we cared about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you scale it really well, because it's super cool to see. It'd be nice to see more of that. I kind of bringing it back to where I took you from, which was finding the really at risk, you call them pre-contemplation type of users. Can you talk a little bit more about like what was word of mouth in this community? Because you're laser focused on engagement, on the actual patient experience. Like I have to think it led to pretty high word of mouth in the community of like, oh, these people actually care about me, so I'm going to tell my friends who are interested in
It did, for sure. But not without a huge, like, this isn't the traditional, like, oh, hey, this is cool, I'm going to recommend
Right.
my friend. This is like, there's major pushback, right? So you're advertising on Facebook, and then people from AA are saying, no, don't try this medical model. This is sinful. This is what, you're not, like, we were up against a much stronger, like, community pushback curve than others. And I think the fact that we've been able to build that community is really a testament to us, like, coexisting in both worlds and being able to speak both languages, that we could, like, create a safe space between all those communities and actually protect our version of the harm reduction community that was really, honored what the contributions of 12-step, but created a broader tent to say, like, yeah, that's fine, that's great, but let's let these other people who can't do it that way come in through these different pathways. And that was hard, and people were scared to engage for a long time. And I think over time, as patients had great experiences, then we got up to 20% organic referrals. Now we have great app store rankings on the app, and that all came from really hard uphill battle work to, like, change hearts and minds in the community, which I don't think a lot of medical apps are going to come up against. I think that's a unique to the addiction space issue that we struggled with.
And where would you put yourself today with that community that you came from? Like, have they kind of seen, like, oh, what they're doing, it works. We may not agree with some of the philosophy or the incentives, but it works.
Yeah, so it's been an enormous amount of change. So many of those more traditional players are beginning to integrate medication-assisted treatment into their residential settings and into their IOP settings. So they're starting to move towards this form of practice and recognizing that at a certain point they won't be able to practice without kind of updating the standard and getting with the science. But it's slow. There'll always be a lot of folks. It's very much like if you have somebody who loves CrossFit, right? It's a hardcore way to get sober, right? And so if you have the CrossFit people, right, they're going to want to do it the CrossFit way, right? It's going to be always hard to get that person to be like, there's also this really lazy way to do it. They're going to be like, no, you do kettlebell after kettlebell after, like, I don't think we need to change their minds. In some ways, I just think they need to recognize that they're a star in a universe of recovery services and not the sun. And I think the United States, like, we sort of mistook that one way for the whole addiction recovery model because it was neglected and because of people that were under-resourced, because it's just been sadly under-resourced. But that's not really true in any other field. Like, you wouldn't go to your doctor, say you have cancer, and they'll be like, either you go to this CrossFit thing or you die. Like, jails, institutions, or it's like, we don't have that with other disease states, and we won't have that with addiction. And there's a lot of nuance and a lot of acceptance in different communities, but there did need to be an adjustment of that being the center of the recovery universe to a more broad, multiple pathways approach. And I think people have come around, and lots of those people work for us now and talk to me again, and there's been enormous change. So I feel vindicated, for sure. But I think we have a long way to go. I think there's a lot of people out there really scared to get help, and really scared, even through a private confidential thing like Workit, to, like, identify with the problem, in part because it's so heated like this and so charged. It's such a, it's not a welcoming process. Workit makes it so much more welcoming and as beautiful as it can be, but it's still, first step's a really big one, no matter how you get started.
Yeah. As a kind of, I remember going to an Al-Anon meeting. I've had family members with addiction issues. I've heard the once an addict, always an addict mantra far too many times. And so I love what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't believe in the pickle cucumber thing anymore. There's this whole, once you're a pickle and you can never be a cucumber. I'm like, no, the science doesn't really say that. If it helps you, if you want to be that pickle and do that kettlebell thing, like, I support that and I'm here for that, but let's just not make everybody do it. And so, yeah.
Can I shift gears one last time? Because it's just like, it's something I really want to hear about, which is the fact that you are co-CEO with Robin, your co-founder. which is not the average case. I'd love to hear how you guys came upon that, like how you decided it, and also what have been the positives and negatives of it.
Yeah. So really, Robin and I have always had kind of a yin yang relationship working together. She's extremely amazing at productizing different schemes that I'm working on. It's like we both have very operational aspects and very vision aspects of our work, but we've always felt that together we made a whole brain in some basic ways, like just an unstoppable machine. And we've had a lot of chemistry working together in that regard. And when we started the company, there were very few women founders. They were not raising a lot of venture capital. It's like 2% of women founders were successful. And we just really wanted to shake that game up and say, like, look, like we're operating from this like industrial revolution leadership model that assumes that like one of us is Henry Ford and there's people on some sort of, assembly line. And we're in this networked economy. We're in a collaborative team-based time of deep interdependence upon each other as a globe. Like we don't want to build that culture or that model of hierarchy. We want to build a model that's consensus driven. We want to build a model that looks at different ways of thinking about things and then comes to a unity around it. And of course, it was not well received by a variety of people along the way. And the people, but it's a great screening mechanism for founders, right? Because if someone doesn't believe in what you're building, if someone doesn't believe in the way that you're building it, like they're not the right backer for you. Like I think we tried to shape shift for a long time, like be like, I'll pretend to be the CEO, you pretend to be, and we're like, this is just not who we are. Like, this is not what we're doing. Like we've built this a certain way. And at a certain point, we just decided to own it and be like, okay, game over. We're not calling ourselves anything other than co-CEOs. And we have been so happy ever since, because it's been freeing to just say, this is a model. This is a real thing we're building. This is a collaborative leadership model that we believe in and that we want to see perpetuated in the world. I don't think this sort of top-down, war-driven metaphors for leadership or like they ended up leading to things like our former president, not to get political, but like they ended up leading to some weird stuff. And we need something a little bit more fluid, more adaptive for the types of virtual organizations we're building that are all about community and new ways of connecting. And so we're really proud of it. And now I would say that, when you're doing well, your numbers are going up, everybody's on board with co-CEO. Jury's going to still be out. If you start tanking, it could come up again. But I think we're big believers and big pushers of it. And we talk about the model a lot and what we think it means and what it means as a philosophy. And I think it guides a lot of our culture. There's a lot of joint leadership at Workit at every level because it trickles down, right? You don't have people, you have heads all collaborating with each other instead of trying to stomp on one another to become directors or VPs or things like that. It creates a consensus driven culture that's really powerful. And I think has served Workit really well, although it's always been hard at different points because, there's so much pushback from the funding industry to mold yourself in a certain way, especially as women. I mean, it's like a double whammy, right? Like BCorp, women, co-CEOs, like boom, 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 like archive email. But we made it and we feel super proud of that.
That's really neat. All right. Thank you so much. Is there anything,
thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to share to the audience that like either, things that you're hiring for or whatever, any sort of plug?
No, we're hiring a ton. So we're hiring a bunch of engineers, product people, sales people, marketing people, all the people.
Okay.
Come see our hiring page.
All right. So Patrick, what like really stood out to you?
I liked mission. I mean, we've heard it repeatedly on nearly every single interview is that these founders are missionaries, and there's pretty insane founder market fit from the outset, which granted we are self-selecting a bit in that these are founders that have made it past usually a Series A hurdle, but clearly that works a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, let's like dig in on that one because I think the founder market fit is really key. She's like from a well, actually, I might say like the founder market fit on this one is not actually all that perfect, but the founder product fit
Founder problem fit
is perfect.
Perfect.
Because like I think if you were to look at this business with like just no knowledge whatsoever, you'd look at like designers, like UX, like folks over here, like product design world, and you'd look at like social work world, and you'd be like, okay, I can see the social work world. Maybe I can see the design world. Like it helps with
Consumer facing.
It helps with the product, but I'm like, what bridges that to addiction treatment, right? Like I feel like that's missing.
The clinical side,
as well as like, how do you actually build a clinic, right? Like, how do you actually prescribe things? How do you partner with health plans? Yeah, totally. But then like you actually hear the story and you're like, got it. Like now it all makes sense. And it's a really good fit.
But I think it was a great fit from the outset because the mindset was we're building this for ourselves, what we wish we had, what we wish our friends had. We're product. We have like Lisa sounds like she has the voice of customer. I mean, they both have voice of customer, but she's bringing that heavy angle in. And then Robin's like, oh, I can like, let's create a product out of this thing. Yep. And then that got you to your first users. And then it sounds like they just moved quickly. Yeah, totally.
I mean, I think again, I think they absolutely have founder problem fit and they figured out how to get to founder market fit. But like initially, I think you could look at them and say, wait, what? Like, or at least like, look at their resumes and be like, does that really make sense? And once you dig in, you're like, oh, that does make sense. Like, here's how it works.
Yeah. I guess if we were venture designing it, maybe we'd fall into the trap of like, well, I think you'd need a growth person on your founding team.
Yep,
so.
Exactly. And like, who's the medical person here?
Right. Yeah. Do you have a clinical advisor? It's like, well, you're just going to fucking make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about the consumer first focus on engagement mindset. So Lisa said that from the outset, they had a laser focus on the patient experience because they wanted to focus on engagement, and they also didn't want to go B2B first because I love this, so I'll repeat it again. She said your product will reflect the complexity and the grossness of your initial path to market, which yes,
100%.
Yes.
And like the more we play around, the more I'm like 90% of these businesses today in health tech and digital health should be consumer first and like make them consumer first. Launch with consumers, get early feedback cycles, build a great product, be done with it, right? Like move from there, but don't start the other way around. It works. I mean, Calm versus Headspace is the easy one to go back to. It's like Calm is winning. Not to say Headspace is doing poorly, but Calm is winning because they have a better consumer focused product that then went to payers of multiple types versus Headspace who went the opposite way.
Right. So maybe it's just as for our purposes, as lightweight of a lift as let's just change our defaults to default to consumer first and have that heavy B2B anchor just sitting there. Yeah.
And then I like it. I like her description of it, like gave me like the warm and fuzzies inside because I'm like, oh, she's like, they're just product people building great products. And I was like, wait, that's what I want to be.
Yeah. That's what we like doing. Yeah. It gives you the fast iterations, which clearly was all the difference in the world. Which then, let's talk about first users getting it through the AA community, iterating with those, and then deciding to go against the dogma of the AA community because it was the right thing to do. So kind of using a community to bootstrap your initial user base, but then realizing, oh my God, in order to build the product that I know we need to build, we're going to really upset you.
Yeah. That feels like that would have been a very tough pivot in real life.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Very painful. And like Man, those naysayers would have been out in full force early before you really had the new believers. So, boy, it must have felt.
Yeah, you're stomaching some doubt for a long time.
Exactly.
Some heartache.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how much it rings true, but it kind of reminds me of our Ryan Grant conversation about rechanging the entire practice of medicine.
Yeah.
I wonder how much doubt you stomach, although that perhaps there's a little more of an academic exercise there.
I mean, even just thinking about like running Facebook ads, when she was talking about like running Facebook ads, you just get comments upon comments. I'm like, oh man,
Right.
that'd be so sad. Like I would read those.
So sad.
I'd read those and I'd be like, what are we doing? What are we doing? We should just go back. Like there's a bunch of people out here who want something, and like we could give it to
build
them.
what they want, build what they want within their methodology.
But they totally stayed strong to this is the right way to do it. So we're just going to do it that way, and they'll come along at some point.
And it's working.
Yep. Can we talk about the CoCEO thing for a second? Because I think like that one is so fun for me. Like in many ways, like we don't call ourselves CEO at all, but like you and I act as co-CEOs. Like I think in a standard venture fund, people being partners, it's like an individual exercise. It's like one partner owns a deal, another partner owns another deal.
Yeah.
But like for us, it's like no, it's very much like we are a team. And so like it kind of feels like we are co-CEOs, but so all of the stuff sort of rings true there. But the one thing that I really particularly loved is this thing that I just keep coming back to all the time these days, which is I think either David Cohen or one of the Techstars folks said it first, which was raising money is a search exercise. It's not a persuasion exercise. And they had to find investors who already were fine with co-CEOs, already were fine with a B Corp. It's like, don't try to persuade them that it's going to work. If they're not there, just don't do it. And I'm like, yep, that's the way to do everything. Like, find the believers, move on.
Yeah. And I kind of want to take the founder side of it, because she said something that I think maybe like I forget it a lot, and maybe other founders forget it a lot, which is you can build it however you want to build it because it's yours to build. And I think we often get caught up in what's the typical way to do it?
Yeah.
How should we build it? How has everyone else done it? But if you kind of abstract away the scene, you're still building a business. And why are you building it? Because you want to build a business. You want your own business, so you can structure it however you want.
Yep.
And for them, that's co-CEOs, and that makes them really, really happy.
Yep.
And they get to be exactly who they are. And I think for founders, it's, especially in healthcare, I know you have to toe a certain line of like designing it in the right way. But I wish more founders would just be like, no, this is how I want to build my business.
Yep.
Oh, you don't want to invest? That's fine. I'll find someone else.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Instead of just going like, this is kind of cookie cutter how it goes.
Yep. I think it's fascinating to think about the slow burn of this business, which is like clearly on a tear right now. And I think that was probably greatly enhanced by COVID. But it's 7 years old, and they bootstrapped the business for the first, call it, year and a half, two years.
Yeah.
And then they raised a seed, which wasn't a ton of money. It was money. But that's a long haul. Like they really grinded it out and built something.
Mission driven.
Yep. I'd love to hear more about that financing strategy, that how it actually worked in the beginning. Like, how did they make ends meet? How were they paying rent? Like,
especially when I think they said they weren't charging users at the very, very outset.
Yeah.
I wonder how long that stayed true.
Yep.
And yeah, a little bit of me is like, I wonder how much the need to figure out a business model also precipitated this shift to, oh, well, who's going to be paying this? Well, consumer would pay for this, but I'm not sure that this target customer, this target user is like the best paying user. Well, who else pays for this? She already said self-insured. No.
Yep.
Like, we're going for the highest risk, trying to save someone's life. Okay, it's going to be Medicaid. It's going to be payer side.
Yep.
And what that comes with is a lot of clinical rigor.
Yep.
And a lot of convincing on that side. So you kind of know what you need to become.
Yep. Yep, completely. Anything else stand out to you?
The last thing was she said at the outset that she and Robin looked at what was going on in diabetes prevention programs with Omada Health and coaching as a trend. I was like, why doesn't that exist? I think that's a really fun thing of looking outside of your problem and just trying to find the connections to be like, wait, why that could work.
Yeah.
Why is there not that level of attention, money, technology to this use case? So I just thought, like, I love hearing analogies.
I do too. Yeah. Like, it is really cool. It's like, because I mean, so much of healthcare is that, like, find a unique distribution, unique experience, and then apply it to many different chronic diseases of different sorts.
Right, which is why you see a lot of, I've seen certain pseudo market maps broken out by specialty.
Yeah. And
they'll give like amount of funding or number of startups in, and we're so early days across the board.
Yeah.
So take those models and replicate.
Yep. All right. Well, I thought that was awesome. I think she's amazing. They're building a cool business here in Michigan, so it's fun.
Yeah. Good luck, Robin.
Yeah.
Good luck, Lisa.